Hello everyone, it's Emax Day. This is the BabyHawk II HD. It has the Emax Eco 1404 3700 kV motors. And on those motors are the Emax Scimitar 3.5 inch quad bladed props. It's HD, so it has the Caddx Nebula Pro, as well as the Caddx Vista. The only one down here is an F4 with a 25 amp ESC and the typical mounting pattern for a Whoop board. It does have a capacitor right there, but I am unable to read the writing on there in order to be able to tell you what microfarad that one is in voltage. There is a plastic piece that's below the all-in-one board, so if you were to come down in wet grass, it shouldn't get through that direction. It would have to come through over here. This little lead out back is to connect your S-Bus receiver. It does have a flexible antenna tube on the Caddx Vista antenna. XT30 for your battery mounting. Standoffs have TPU, but they're sheaths. They slide down over metal standoffs, and that is how your camera is mounted. The antenna is mounted to a carbon piece that's not TPU, and it goes in between the Vista and the standoff. Of course, you've got a rubberized battery mat to make that battery stick on the quad, and a silicone-lined Emax battery strap. It also comes with an extra standoff, some washers, some various screws, the Caddx Vista introduction guide, and a sheet of stickers. Bottom plate is 4mm thick. Top plate is 2mm thick. Rear arm is 4mm wide. The forward rear arm is also 4mm. Yeah, that one's 4mm too. And the most forward arm is 4mm. Motor mounting pattern is your traditional 9x9. And if you're curious, the Whoop mounting board is 26mm mounting. It weighs 140 grams right on the nose. I flew it primarily on an 850 milliamp 4S battery, which brings the weight to just about 239 grams. I still got about 3-minute flight time out of a 550 milliamp 4S battery, which brings the weight to 212 grams. Hopefully you can see there the tree is barely blowing around. We got blessed with some very beautiful weather here recently, and very fortunate, high degree as far as this time of year, and pretty low winds that has really allowed me to fly outside and stretch my legs a lot more here in the last couple of weeks after we had that cold spell that just kind of swept through the country here a little bit. And this is a unique quad in that it's 3.5-inch propeller. I think that's an important thing to note, because to my knowledge there's only one 3.5-inch propeller, and that is this Emax Scimitar, which actually came out here a while back. So you've probably seen that prop before and wondered what you could fly it on. Well, this is what you can fly it on. And Emax Scimitar props have, I think, pretty widely been accepted as very good props. They're very rigid, and stiff, and they also are pretty smooth, and this machine is very smooth. This 3.5-inch quad isn't going to set you back in your chair, so to speak, when you hit that 100% full throttle. It's not like a 1408 might be on a 3-inch prop, to where you just get that feeling if you go 100% on the throttle and ooh, back in my chair. It's going to be much more smooth, and I think that's going to be more suited to more people and fit pretty well really in the Emax kind of line of their quads. They don't tend to go for the ultra performance. They want good flight time, they want good flight feel, and of course the Emax pilots, the sponsored pilots, the people who work for Emax do a lot of work on making sure the tune is very good as well. Pretty much when you get one of these, if you have established rates, you want to plug in your rates, maybe move some OSD stuff around and set the switches for your radio to the modes and the arming that you want them to be set to, and then you just go out, charge some batteries, and fly. I mentioned it in the quick roll. I did also fly this on a smaller battery, a 550 milliamp, and got about a 3-minute flight time. We're going to look at 2 flights here. One of my more traditional flight that we're kind of looking at now, and then we're going to decrease the camera angle a little bit and go for more of an exploratory cruisy flight. I still do some punch outs, I still do some hard cornering, but the speed is just a little less. And what's interesting about that is how the flight time really starts to jump up with just, a 10-degree change in camera angle and maybe a 10% change in attitude when flying, and you get so much more flight time. Of course, with the Caddx Vista, you get the HD image that you're looking at. This is not a secondary camera. This is what you're looking at in the goggles if you're unfamiliar with that system. And you also get great control range if you're using the DJI radio, which I am in this particular case. I also have a pretty dramatic crash, at least I think it's pretty dramatic, that we'll watch that, but I don't have any sound for that though. We'll watch that between the 2 flights, because I think that's an important point for you to see, to give you a summation of what happens. I clip a branch on a punch out, the quad tumbles. I have a moment where I could have saved it, but I didn't. And I end up smacking into the top of the garage, rolling down the garage, hitting the top of the shed, falling off the shed, and down to the ground. And no damage, because that was just earlier today. As a matter of fact, I was out flying it again, just for fun, having a little bit of fun. The battery strap is fairly long, and you'll find, I'll show you back at the desk, that you may need to tuck it unless you do something like cut it or something else. You know, you can definitely fly a much larger battery and probably get more flight time. Of course, it'll change the agility a little bit, and the battery strap will be just fine. You won't be under that 250 gram limit very likely unless you go... I don't think so. I think if you go to 1,000 milliamp, I think you'll be over the 250 gram limit. And that's another big feature of this quad, is to be able to get under that weird magic number that has been kind of labeled safe somehow. This quad will get you there with a pretty unique prop in that it's 3.5 millimeters. Of course, we could see other props hit the market if this becomes real popular, and you might have some prop options, but to my knowledge right now, the only prop option is going to be your Emax Scimitar. So if you're buying one of these, definitely grab an extra set of props at least. But these props, when they do bend, they bend back pretty good. I think it's going to take a pretty tremendous crash in order to break a prop. I don't know that I've broken a prop. I've probably changed a few of the Emax props out over the years to where they've been bent up so much I didn't have any faith they were going to continue to stay that way. Okay, that's the end of our flight. Let's jump into the crash footage. So again, this is kind of an evening time flight. This was not a flight I had planned to use. I was just going out and doing some more flying. And so we're looking at a little bit more than just the crash. Unfortunately, because I do disarm before we hit the ground, you don't get to see the full crash in all its glory. I need to change. Oh, there it is. You see that moment where I could have corrected that? Tumble, tumble, tumble. You saw the air conditioner there for a minute. Let's go back and watch that again. There's one moment right there where I'm just completely inverted and I'm trying to recognize what's going on, but I just wasn't quick enough on the sticks in order to be able to be able to make a correction so I wouldn't tumble all the way to the ground. But so be it. Good crash test. Everything on the quad was fine. That was the most dramatic crash I had. Let's go back to the longer flight now. So hopefully you can tell, we can see a little bit more of the table and our camera angle is a little bit less. And I talk about attitude. Sometimes when I lower the camera angle, I have a different attitude about my flight as a pilot. This flight's going to come in at 6 minutes and 35 seconds. Again, it's a 4S 850 milliamp battery. You're also going to see me trying to adjust to that lower camera angle. You know, I'm used to flying a higher camera angle most of the time, and probably the flight right before this, I had a higher camera angle, so I'm going to be a little bit sloppy. But I wanted to give you another sample for... You know, if you're not someone who likes to whiz around, maybe you like more exploratory sort of flight and you're wondering about the flight time, this gives you another sample that this sort of flight of just kind of cruising around. By the way, we have a contractor over there. That's who you hear banging. That's Chad. He is a really good guy. We've had him do a number of things at the house since I kind of retired from doing home remodeling projects. I'm sure he appreciates that. Pretty much he comes over and does our jobs whenever he has a lull in his schedule. So sometimes we have to wait a couple of months before he's able to come around and do a few things. But he's doing some fixing on some siding that's starting to fall apart. It really needs to be replaced. Might get another year or 2 or 3 out of that siding that he's repairing before we do need to finish out replacing all the siding on the house. Again, I wanted to show you this flight because not everybody's going to have the same sort of flight style, and you might have questions that this flight would sort of answer for you rather than having to type that in the comment section and then wait for me to get back to you about my experience of doing slower flight. I did mention it already, but I did fly on a 550 milliamp 4S battery with this same sort of lower camera angle, and I got about a 3-minute flight out of it. So even with a relatively small battery at 550 milliamp, getting a 3-minute flight time, that's pretty good considering that's really an undersized battery for this quad, and it does highlight the efficiency of this setup. Unfortunately, I can't tell you the price. My price suspicion would be, you know, it's got the Caddx Vista in it, so it's probably going to be $160 more than most of the others out there. $120 to $160 more than most of the others in this category. So I'll have a link down in the video description. Several links to whoever's selling it. At this moment in time, of course, I don't know who all is going to be having the product. I suspect our traditional vendors here in the U.S. We'll see Pyrodrone, we'll see Race Day Quads, we'll see Get FPV, we might see Heli Nation, we might see Ready Made RC, we might see various places selling this on launch day, but Of course, it's not launch day while I'm recording this because I still have to edit this all together and upload it to YouTube and type out all the things that need typed out in YouTube before we get to that launch point. So there's probably a whole bunch of other videos you could also watch on this to get more information. And I would encourage you to make sure you're doing your research. You know, money doesn't grow on trees. So if you're wanting to be sure about your purchases, get a lot of flight examples and flight opinions and see where it falls for you and whether it's a quad that you want to get or not. Well, I start to run out of things to say. I don't want to talk too much about the quad because many people have probably skimmed forward to other sorts of things. I guess a few things that I could talk about while we're trying to finish out this really lengthy flight here is, well, one, we had that crash point, so we know it's going to be relatively durable. Of course, I didn't fall all the way from the height of a punch-out straight into the ground, and I definitely didn't hit any cement, but again, that's a crash point that you can use for your diagnosis of whether it's going to be durable or not. I think putting that plastic bit, that clear plastic bit underneath the board, that was a really good idea. We've seen other manufacturers do the same sort of mounting and having gaps in the frame down there. And I've read reports in some of those other cases where someone did come down and maybe got a little bit of water or something on the board, maybe a rock or a pebble jammed up in there on a landing or a crash, and then it hurt or damaged the flight controller, which meant a new flight controller was needed. So having that plastic bit, while it won't protect you from a hard, like rock or something like that might poke up through there, it gives you a fighting chance that, you know, water won't get up through there. I would say if you want to help protect the bottom of the board a little bit, taking some foam tape and just cutting it to that kind of diamond pattern that we have in the bottom of the frame and putting it on that plastic bit, that will give a little bit more of a fighting chance that if you were to come down on a rock by chance, say you're flying at a park or something, that the rock wouldn't damage one of the FETs or one of the components on the board. It's not a guarantee, but again, it gives you a fighting chance that it wouldn't. You could also, I'm sure somebody will come out with a 3D print that would allow you to put it right on the bottom of the frame as well. So if you want to do something like that, just hit thingiverse.com, look for probably something in the lines of Emax BabyHawk II HD and see what they've got in store. I do suspect we'll also see a third-party camera mounting come out for this. You can't see it in the moment because I'm looking at the frame and you're watching the flight footage, but there are two mount points on the top that don't line up with anything on the bottom that look like they could be made for a third-party action camera mount. So you tie those 2 points in with the camera points, and you have 4 points that you can use, say a GoPro, maybe a naked GoPro, or maybe the new Insta360 Go that's coming out, the V2 that's coming out. So there are some options there. And we'll take a look at these finer points back at the desk. I'm just trying not to have too much dead air, as they say in radio. We have that carbon plate that is used to mount the antenna to. That was a smart idea. And so the top plate is supported kind of through the Caddx Vista. The Vistas, I think, are well constructed and pretty hardy. I am a bit concerned that with a severe enough crash, is it possible that we damage the Vista because it's part of the rear support? I don't know, but we'll look at that a little bit closer back at the desk so you can get a better feel for that mounting and construction back there. Of course, I showed it in the quick roll. We've got a lead that comes on the quad to where you could plug in if you have a receiver that takes that particular type of connector. I think in most cases, most people would just wire, but it does tell you where you need to wire for S-Bus. It's right there on the flight controller, so as you disassemble the top plate and kind of pull things to the side, you wouldn't have to look up a wiring map. It's got the wires right there for you. We're finally reaching the tail end of that flight. Again, that flight was 6 minutes and 35 seconds. I should have mentioned it in the flight footage. We had plenty of time there, but this does come with Betaflight 4.2.5. I don't suggest you tinker with that outside of setting your modes to your switches, your rates, and maybe some OSD elements. It is well tuned. Of course, if you're familiar with Betaflight setup and tuning, you know, those things, you don't have to take my advice. It's just something I'm trying to insert for these videos for people who might get started. If you buy this and you see that Betaflight 4.5 is out or something like that, should I upgrade? Not unless you know how to tune. Not unless you know how to set up Betaflight. If you've only got one quad, my answer is still don't tinker with Betaflight. Have fun. Enjoy this. Okay, a few of the things that we talked about during the flights that we didn't have the hardware to look at. I think the most important one is a look here at the tail section. Let me turn it this way. Hopefully that's clear enough. So we have a short standoff here. We have this bottom carbon fiber plate, and then the Vista is really used for part of the structure here. You know, the Vistas don't have like a through hole in them. There's only enough room in there to get an M2 screw through there. So this carbon plate and this standoff is supporting the rear end. That may be an issue for you. You know, of course, I had a pretty violent crash. At least I think I had a fairly violent crash, and it really didn't do any harm to the quad. Matter of fact, is that a crack there, or is that... I might have cracked the antenna on that crash. This does look like a crack, but as I squeeze it, I can't get it to really open up or anything. It does have that flexible tube there, so that probably helped me out a lot there. And then on the front here, this is TPU. It slides down over the standoffs, and the TPU have the camera mount built right into them. I can't see that. That prop is in the way. Come on. How am I? There we go. So this whole sleeve that goes over the front standoff has the mount built into it right here. And you can get some fairly heavy camera angle. You know, I wasn't flying it like that, but you could get that. Also, go back and notice, I should have said it during the flight video again, we could see a little bit of one of the top carbon fiber plates in the faster flight. It's curious to me that must mean the camera was shifted a little bit one way or another in order to get, I think it was on this side, so I presume the camera was shifted a little bit this way. Something up when you're flying here is if you see a bit of your canopy or the top plate, just kind of get the camera to move around a little bit. So you can go all the way to flat or even negative if, well, I wouldn't suggest that, but you can get the camera all the way down there, or you can get the camera all the way up there. Got enough clearance built in, no problem there. One thing they didn't do that I would have liked to have seen them do is to secure the battery lead. So if I were you, I would take a zip tie and run it through either one. I would put it on one of the big sides here. I wouldn't go here, but anything is better than nothing. So loop it around your power lead and then zip tie it to the bottom, and then have the knot of the zip tie here on the side so it doesn't end up getting worn off and bumped a lot when you come in for landing. That way the zip tie is holding down your battery lead a little bit, so if you have a crash and the battery tugs on your battery lead, it's not tugging directly down onto your ESC pads where the battery connects. You know, you pull those off, and that's a nightmare for an experienced person to resolder to those traces that are down there, and then you really have nothing that's going to keep your battery in place as far as when you have a crash and coming dislodged. You know, if you solder that back to the traces and this gets really much of a tug at all, it's not going to take much where it's just going to come off, because once those pads come off, the boards are just, those traces just aren't made for that. So to remedy that, I would take a zip tie, push these wires down a little bit, maybe give yourself a little wrinkle between where you're going to secure the zip tie and the battery pads, and then cinch it down, not super tight, but firm, and then have the knot on this side. That's the one thing I would recommend anyone who has that concern to do. Also, the capacitor here has a bit of foam underneath it. That's a good idea because we don't want the capacitor coming in contact with the board, so that would damage things. Because it is a 3.5-inch prop size, getting your USB cable in from over here is a non-issue. You should be able to get any USB cable plugged in here. You shouldn't need a right angle adapter or anything like that. It should just plug in and work out just fine. As far as all the screws go, we've got hex. We've got 1.5 millimeter hexes all over the place. I do think they should have included some pads for the bottom, because as you can see on mine, they're already starting to wear a little bit, and if that wears too much, getting your hex tool in there and trying to turn those screws, that's going to become an issue. So I would get yourself a little bit of padding to put somewhere. You can put it here on the big parts of the frame. It doesn't really work here. Maybe you have to do something up here to where these screws aren't, you know, you're not sliding on the cement. When you come into land, you know, we tend to have a little bit of forward momentum when we come into land, and that little bit of sliding, you can see in just the couple of weeks I've had this quad, has worn off some of these, the very tops, tips, edges, but over the long term, that has potential that it might cause additional damage and give you some fussiness. So I would definitely put some padding up here wear on that. You can buy specialized padding that's made for that, but anything that keeps the screws up off the ground that you can replace easily is going to be good. We really don't have much motor protection. As you can see here, well, let me turn it over. That's a better way of looking at it. It sticks out maybe a millimeter or two on this point, and this point, but there's really not a lot of motor protection there. I've seen we've kind of gotten away from that in the last year or two, we used to have like spikes and stuff that would come out from our frame, and that would, you know, it has the potential that if you banged into something that you wouldn't be banging the motor, you'd be banging the carbon fiber. But we just don't see that all that much anymore. It seems like it's gotten shorter over the years, and now it's just got to the point where it's barely there at all. So you have to decide whether that's an important feature for you to have, but be aware, this doesn't really have any motor protection that you get. Of course, motor protection, if you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I'm flying forward most of the time. I know there's some people that are talented and fly backwards, but, you know, when you're flying, you're generally not crashing into something completely flat anyways. So a motor protection that points down and then you run into an object, presumably that's straight up and down for the most part, it could do something, but the potential is that maybe that motor protection wasn't doing much, and they've just, as manufacturers, decided to move away from it. We do still see some frames with it. It's just not as predominant. Sorry, I got sidetracked on a minor point there. On this antenna mounting here on the back, don't think those are nylon lock nuts on the back. Don't think so. Really hard to tell, though. It's hard to see. Don't think those are nylon nuts. I didn't have any problems with it. By the way, this has been out since before Chinese New Year. At least mine arrived before Chinese New Year. And so I've been flying it quite a bit. I flew it in some really bad weather. I was really hopeful at that point in time that they weren't going to launch right away. Look at how banged up my props are. They're just all road rash from the roof. All of them. And this one, is that a heavy crease, or do they all have that? No, they all have that. I don't think any of these got dramatically bent up that I can recall, but geez, they're all sorts of road rashed. They're just from that crash on the roof just earlier today. That's crazy. Well, I've gone on too long. Hopefully this review has helped you make a decision about this quad and whether it's for you or not. Again, there should be other videos out there, and I would encourage you to take a look at them if you're trying to make a purchase decision. There'll be links down in the video description if you'd like to check out the price point, because at this moment, I don't know what the price point will be for sure. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.